Hi, I'm Karin Gleason, Chief of the Climate Monitoring Section at NOAA's National Centers for Environmental Information in Asheville, North Carolina.
And I'm Rennie, a research meteorologist here at NCEI, and we're going to give you a brief introduction to some of the work that we do to help inform science, education, and the economy.
So NCEI maintains one of the most significant archives on Earth with comprehensive oceanic, atmospheric, and geophysical data. We archive and provide access to data from the depths of the ocean to the surface of the sun. NCEI is the nation's authoritative source for historical environmental information.
Our headquarters are here in the mountains of Asheville, North Carolina, but we have offices all across the country, including Maryland, Louisiana, and Colorado, and we serve all 50 states and territories of the United States, and in some cases we serve the globe as well.
So here we are in the physical archives here at NCEI in Asheville, and we maintain records both in paper and as well as digital that aren't here. A lot of these records are of historical significance, and so we keep those paper records handy. Some of these observations are from the early 1900s and are handwritten, and some even precede that from weather observers like Thomas Jefferson in the late 1700s. So you might ask, how much digital data does NCEI really have in its archive? Currently, we have about 55 petabytes of data in our archive, and that's equivalent to a stack of smartphones as tall as 33 Eiffel Towers or more than 6 miles high. That volume is expected to grow exponentially over the next decade.
So we're going to talk a little bit about climate normals. This is one of the products that NCEI generates. In order to understand what a climate normal is, we have to have a little discussion about what's going outside your window right now. So if you have a window, go take a look. Is it sunny? Is it rainy? Is it hot? Is it cold? Did it rain yesterday, but it's sunny today? Was it 90 degrees 2 days ago, but now it's 60 degrees because a cold front went through? Are these things weather or are these things climate? They may sound similar, but there are actually discrepancies between the two. And so that's what we're going to talk about for a second here is weather versus climate. So weather is essentially the day-to-day fluctuations of the atmosphere. So it can be very chaotic, a warm day today and then a cold day tomorrow. When we think about climate is more sort of a long-term average of weather. So for example, like seasons, in the springtime, we might expect temperatures to be a little bit warmer than a winter season. Summer is usually when we have our warmest temperatures and most of our precip in parts of the US. So when we think about it that way, that's weather versus climate. Now at NCEI, we tend to focus a little bit more on the climate side, and we do that by creating something called normals. So climate normals are essentially long-term averages of weather variables like temperature and precipitation on a given day. We specifically define climate normals as a 30-year period through something called the World Meteorological Organization, and we just recently produced climate normals for the period of 1991 to 2020. So what you're seeing on the screen here are temperature normals for every day from January 1st through December 31st for the 30-year period of 1991 through 2020. And as you probably saw, temperatures kind of sort of rose up throughout the year as it warmed up. And then now we're on the latter half of the year and things tend to cool off. And you probably saw a really nice animation. It's a lot easier to see that with temperature. It's a little harder for precipitation because it's not as continuous. But we're going to let this run here. So it kind of starts off kind of blank as first. But usually in the springtime, we see a lot of precipitation come up in the southeastern US and parts of the west, including the Cascade Mountains of the Northwest. And you'll start to notice as we get through June and July, that's when most of the heaviest precip occurs in the southeast US. And you can sort of start to see that being reflected on the map here. And then again, these are precipitation normals for a 30-year period from 1991 to 2020. And then we will sort of use this information, the climate, to contextualize what the weather is doing on a very specific day.
So in the monitoring section, we're responsible for taking recent weather conditions and placing them into historical context. We sometimes call ourselves the nation's scorekeepers for weather and climate, and we keep track of changes in temperature over time. For instance, here's a global time series from 1850 to 2022, annual temperatures showing below average temperatures for the globe transitioning to above average temperatures. We also look at snapshots of the globe, the temperature of the globe showing the warmest temperatures near the North Pole and some cooler temperatures towards the equator. We also keep track of our billion-dollar disasters across the country, and these are the disasters that were identified last year in 2022. We also track and keep a watchful eye on drought as it changes across the US. So you might ask, what might the warmest summer on record look like for the United States, for the lower 48? In fact, this map depicts what the record warmest summer has been historically, and this occurred back in the summer of 2021, so the months of June, July, and August. As you can see from this map, the bright red colors are the areas that actually had their warmest summer on record. The orange locations had a top 10 warmest summer, and in fact, there are locations from Texas to the southeast that actually had a below average temperature value for the summer, despite the entire nation averaging as warmest on record. Conversely, if we take a look at precipitation, what might it be the warmest year in the last 5 decades? Well, actually 2019, recently, we had a very wet year across the United States. And again, we see areas in the west and in the northern plains and the Great Lakes and the central Mississippi Valley to parts of the Northeast that actually had a very wet to record wet year. But parts of the Pacific Northwest and in spots of the southern plains and southeast, they actually had below average precipitation for this year. But when averaged all together for the nation, it ends up being the wettest year in the last 5 decades. So each month, the monitoring section creates a state of the climate report for both the US as well as for the globe. And this helps inform industry and the media, and as well as curious citizens, about the kind of weather events that have occurred and how temperature and precipitation vary across the country and how that compares to our historical data. When possible, we try to make connections between the weather that occurred and the impacts that resulted. So for instance, here is a map of the mean temperature of the United States, and we see well above average temperatures across the eastern half of the lower 48. Looking at precipitation, we see above average precipitation from the Great Lakes to the Central Plains, and some dry conditions in the Northwest and in parts of the South, as well as the Northeast and the East Coast. And then we even provide rankings for our products. So it's like how you finish a race. Were you the first, the second, the third, the 25th? And in this case, it shows that for February 2023, Virginia had its warmest February on record. One of the things that we do to provide additional context is we create a significant events map for both the US and the globe. This happens to be our global significant events map for 2022. And the kinds of events that we try to highlight give you some idea for what types of weather occurred, as well as the context looking at the historical records. So we track things like hurricanes and typhoons and where they occurred. We look at the temperature on each continent and try to relate it to the historical record. Was it the warmest year on record for that continent? The 5th warmest? Was it cooler than average? We also try and keep track of the sea ice extent, both near the North Pole and the South Pole. Is it above average? Is it below average? As well as wildfires and floods and so forth. So we try and track as many things as we can and provide some context. One of the tools that we have on our website is called Climate at a Glance, and we can interrogate this for both global data as well as US data. So this is an example of a United States temperature time series from the beginning of the record, which is 1895 to 2022, for the annual period. And this shows the year-to-year variability in temperature, and superimposed over that is a 20th century average, which is sort of our baseline. So anything above that we consider above average, anything below that would be below average temperature. On top of that, I've superimposed a 50-year trend line, which shows that on average over that 50 years, there's been about a 0.5 degree of warming per decade that we've seen in the climate record for the lower 48. So this data and information that we provide about the state of our current climate conditions helps industries like agriculture and energy and transportation and insurance.
For more information about all the data and services we provide here at NCEI, you can go to www.ncei.noaa.gov, and there you'll be able to access all of the data sets we archive, all of the data sets we talked about today, and the monitoring reports, and the visualizations, and the normals data, and so much more. You can check out other resources provided by NOAA, as well, as NOAA is all across the country, and we're here to analyze our data and make your own weather observations.
In fact, if you're interested in being a citizen scientist, you can visit our COCORAS website, www.cocoras.org, and you can volunteer to observe precipitation data and make observations and upload those on the internet, as well as view maps of precipitation around the country that really help us understand the variability in precipitation. So feel free to check that resource out as well. We are proud to serve NOAA and the public to drive decision making and innovation towards a climate ready nation.